Hello and welcome everyone to my YouTube channel. I hope all of you are doing good. This is a beginning of a series of lectures that I will do here, specifically for those who have PSIR, that is Political Science and International Relations, as an optional subject in UPSC, or if you're someone who is still thinking which optional to take, and if PSIR is one of the options in your mind, maybe this lecture series will help you out. So, if you look at the PSIR syllabus, one of the most important topics that carry a lot of weightage is the Western political thinker. Western political thinkers is in paper 1, part A. In Western political thinkers, you read about Plato, Aristotle, Locke, Hobbes, Marx, Gramsci, Hannah Arendt, so on and so forth. So, what I will do here is I will be discussing in great detail, in depth, some of these Western political thinkers, theory by theory, not just completing one thinker in one lecture because just reading Plato would require multiple hours. So, in this lecture today, I am going to talk about Plato's theory of justice. What exactly did he define justice by? What was his thought process? And in the end, the most important thing we'll do is we'll also see the previous year questions that have been asked from this part so that we are on track to answer these questions. Now, Plato, probably one of the most important and recurring topics that the UPSC asks in the PSIR paper. Now, if you look at Plato, most of his thoughts that we discuss are written in his book called The Republic. It's a very fascinating book. It's an interesting way in which he has written the book. So, a few things that you need to understand about Plato. Number one, he was a student or a disciple of Socrates. So, whatever happened in the life of Socrates, how he died specifically, had a lot of impact on Plato. So much so that the book Republic, if you read that book, the main character of that book is called Socrates. So it is written by Plato, but Plato is actually speaking from the point of view of Socrates. So the main character is Socrates. So he has given dialogues to Socrates and he is basically trying to find answers to most of the questions about how to bring Greece back to its glory days, mainly Athens, how to bring Athens back to its glory days. Now, first, let's understand a bit of background about Plato and why exactly is it that this particular book is so important and why was he so fascinated by this idea of justice. To understand that, understand a very important part of Greek history. That was around 5th century BC, there was a war between Athens and Sparta. This was called the, just let me see how the pen will work. Yes. So this was called the Peloponnesian War. Now, this war changed Greece for many, many, many decades to come. Now, what happened here? Understand this. In Greece, Athens used to be the main power. They were the main power centers, and Athens was always extremely proud of its democracy, its power, its military might, etc. But in 5th century BC, when Sparta, a much smaller kingdom, came to defeat Athens, there were many questions asked now. First question: was Athens now declining? Was the democracy in Athens in danger? Was there corruption? Were the rulers in Athens not working in the interest of the people? Were the rulers only working in their own interest? These were the questions that came in after this famous Peloponnesian War. Now, after this war, the focus was on Socrates. Now, let's look at what happened with Socrates. So, Socrates, defined as the most learned man at that point of time, he used to spread a lot of ideas about wisdom. Now, at that time, the rulers in Greece used to propagate this theory of divine rights. Means the rulers in Greece wanted people to know that rulers are actually reflection of God. The rulers, if I am the king, I would tell the people, do you know who I am? I am sent by the God. Why? So that you do not question me. There's a very interesting thing. If something wrong happens in your life, the only option you have is God might have done this. Bhagwan ki ichha thi, right? And then you don't question that. The kings never wanted people to question them. So the kings propagated this theory of divine rights, saying that if I do something wrong, if I order to cut your hand, even then you can't question me because I am the reflection of God, the God has sent me. Socrates was the first one who started to question this. Socrates said that no, this is wrong. He started to educate people. He started to tell people that you have to question the rulers. You can't just be on the feet of the rulers. And this did not go well with the ruling class. Socrates spread his ideas, his knowledge far and wide after the end of the war. This angered the rulers. So Socrates was charged with a crime of polluting the young minds, that he was polluting the young minds, and he was actually trying to persuade people to have a rebellion, to have a revolution against the ruler. So Socrates had to be present in front of a jury of common people. Socrates presented his defense. However, the jury found him guilty, and Socrates was forced that you have to drink poison. And that is how Socrates died. Now, this left an extremely important impact, a very deep impact on the mind of Plato. That impact was about questioning democracy. See, Socrates died because most of the people in the jury voted by saying that yes, he is guilty. Plato thought that democracy's greatest problem is that it only favors larger majority. If there are 100 people, whatever 51 people say, it will be the correct version. Doesn't matter if they are lying, doesn't matter what they believe is wrong or not. That is why he started questioning democracy. Also, because what happened to Socrates was injustice in the mind of Plato, the first question he had in the mind was what exactly is justice? How do you define justice? Because there were different definitions given of justice at that point of time. His idea of justice was it should not just be about the laws. Justice has a much bigger purpose to serve. He thought justice has to bring harmony in the society. It has to establish an order. It has to establish a peaceful society. So this was the question that Plato now was trying to solve. What exactly is justice? Now, if I ask you, let's forget about Plato for a moment. Let me just ask you this question. What do you mean by justice? It's not easy to define it, right? You all understand it, but it's not that easy to define. For example, right now, if you say someone breaks the law, you give him or her the punishment, that is justice. So, in your version, justice is dependent on the laws of the land. But who decides the laws? The current government might think of something as legal, and the next government might say the same thing is illegal. For example, let's say today in India, same sex marriage is not allowed. So if there is someone who goes ahead and let's say undertakes same-sex marriage, that would be illegal. So justice would be in punishing them. Few years later, let's say the government brings in a law and says that now same-sex marriage is allowed. So for the same act now, you will not be punishing them. So justice also can keep changing with time. It depends upon the lawmakers at that time. No, that is the current definition of justice. According to Plato, justice has to be much larger than that. Justice cannot be dependent on a few lawmakers, on how the people will vote, on how and what they decide. That is why Plato wanted to come to a much bigger idea about justice and wanted to discuss this in his book. Now, what did Plato do? First of all, in his book, Republic, it's a very interesting book. It is written in the form of conversation. As I told you, there are multiple characters in the book. The main character is Socrates. He was dead, by the way, when the book was written, but the main character is Socrates. And Plato has given the dialogue. He seems to be the most intelligent person. And his way of discussing or his way of arriving at answers is to discuss it. Socrates used to ask a lot of questions. He used to keep asking them. Becomes that is what is called a dialectical method. We discuss that sometime later, the dialectical method. But that is what Plato has decided to do in his book. Plato, as I said, argues that justice has to be universal. It cannot change depending upon situations. No, it cannot be like in India, same-sex marriage is illegal. In US, in a different situation, same-sex marriage will be legal, or in some other countries it might be legal. So as per Plato, you can't define justice like something which changes depending on situations. It has to be consistent, it has to be universal across everyone. That is why it's not that easy. So Plato had a pretty hard time in defining justice, because again, it is not such an easy solution to have. This is where Plato spends a lot of time. So, first thing that Plato does, he looks into the definitions that were given till that point of time. So, even before Socrates, even before Plato, rather, at the time of Socrates, there were many other thinkers, philosophers at that time who had given their own definitions of justice. These are some of the famous ones which Plato rejected. One was given by Cephalus. Cephalus says justice simply means telling the truth and paying off your debt. If you have taken debt from someone, just pay it back, tell the truth, that is justice. Plato thought that's too simplistic. It does not work in other scenarios, it only works in certain scenarios, right? Then there was a definition given by Polemarchus. He says that justice means helping your friends, harming your enemies. Plato was against this. He said justice cannot harm anyone. The idea of justice is not to harm, it is to reform, it is to establish a society for everyone. And then the most interesting definition comes from a person called Thrasymachus. Now, Thrasymachus' definition again is a definition that was given by a lot of people till the time that Plato came out with this definition. He says justice is the interest of the stronger party. Means between you and me, whoever is the stronger party, they will decide what justice is. Something that Donald Trump will really like at this point of time. What Donald Trump is saying right now is, I will decide what justice is because I am the stronger party. If I think justice is imposing 50% tariffs on India, then that is justice. If I think America can keep on buying uranium and other stuff, other chemicals from Russia, but I mean, India should not buy anything, that is justice. He can say that because Thrasymachus gave that kind of a definition. Plato, however, rejected all of these three. He said that no, justice cannot be any of these. So, how does Plato define justice? To define justice, Plato gets into a very interesting kind of a scenario. Plato says state is individual writ large. Now, this is an extremely important quote. Exactly this quote has been asked by UPSC in the PSIR paper. PSIR paper had a 10 or a 15 mark question where Plato says state is individual writ large. Explain. So the idea was Plato thought to understand how justice works in an individual, let's look at the state. He thought state is nothing but a larger version of an individual. For example, an individual's body has multiple organs to work. All your organs have to work perfectly fine. Similarly, state also has different organs, different bodies. All of them have to work perfectly fine. So he thought to define justice for individuals, it is better to define justice in a larger commodity. That, that larger commodity was the state. He famously said that in larger letters it is easier to read than smaller letters. So what did he do? He gives an analogy, a comparison between the state and the individual. That is a version of his quote. He says that the structure of the state is just like the structure of the human soul. Now, this is where it is getting interesting. He says that the human soul is made up of different components. He says that the individual thought that I alone am not enough. For example, let's say you are an individual, you may be a great engineer, you may be a great lawyer or a teacher or whatever. But if you're a teacher, you find you are ill, you need a doctor. If you're a teacher, someone attacks you, you need the police. If you're the police, you need someone to teach you. So you have to be a teacher. So an individual is not enough, right? An individual is not self sufficient to sustain. That is why, as per Plato, individual decided to form the state. The idea of state came into being because the individual realized they are not self sufficient. People came together, everyone came together to fulfill everyone's need. You can't be a farmer, you need food from the farmer. You can't be a policeman, you can't be a soldier, so you need soldier to protect you. You can't be an engineer, you need an engineer to build airplanes for you. You can't be, let's say, an architect, so you need an architect to build buildings for you. So, in simple terms, state came together because the individual thought that they are not enough, and that is what led to division of labor. Now, this is extremely important because this is where his thought process is now reaching the definition of justice. Plato said that in a society, there is division of labor. There are three main classes in a society. So Plato says in any society there are three types of individuals, three classes. First, rulers. Rulers are the ones who are decision makers. Second are auxiliaries. Auxiliaries are the ones who are the warrior class, the soldiers. Third, the economic class. Traders, producers, farmers, all of them will be the third class. These are the three main sections in a society. This is how the society works by dividing their labor. Plato says justice is these three classes working each and every day within their own circle rather than interfering with each other. As long as the rulers are only ruling, as long as the soldiers are only protecting, as long as the producers are producing, and they are not interfering with each other. The ruler is not trying to tell the soldier how to do its job. The soldier is not telling the farmer how to do its job, or vice versa. As long as that happens, we will have justice in the society. So, Plato says what is justice in the state will exactly be the justice in the individual. In state, justice is every class of citizens performing their own functions. No one should interfere with each other. Exactly the same in individual also. If your soul, now this is where it gets slightly philosophical. He says that a human soul has different qualities. There are three main qualities he talks about. He says that a human soul has three different qualities. Whichever quality is the dominant one in you, whichever dominant quality you have, you must take up that specific profession. Your soul will tell you what individual you are, and you should not then go against it. If you're a ruler, your soul will have rationality or rational thinking as the standout quality. Wisdom will be your virtue. If you're a soldier, spirit is what your soul will specialize in. You will have courage as your virtue. If you're a producer, appetite, you will want a lot of things. You will want to aspire for more, achieve much greater things. That will be the single biggest strong quality of your soul. So, as per Plato, individuals have to be segregated into different occupations depending upon what exactly is the strongest quality of their soul, depending upon what virtue they have, and they should not interfere with each other. Exactly this exact system has to be followed to bring in justice in the society. So, again, in simple terms, in blatant terms, justice means minding your own business, not something that is in the interest of the stronger, not something like paying your debt, not something like no lying or nothing like that. It just has to be minding your own business. As long as you're minding your own business, that is what justice will be according to Plato. And again, he gives respect to all these three. He doesn't say that one has to be over the other. He just says all of them have different qualities. A king has wisdom as a quality, but doesn't know how to produce food, doesn't know how to make stuff. A soldier has courage, but doesn't know how to take the decisions. That is a king's virtue. So there are three classes, and all these three must understand that they should not interfere with each other's work. Now, let me connect this to something that happens today. If justice, as per Plato, is about every part of the government or every profession minding their own business, then what about the judicial overview or the judicial overreach that we see these days? You see the Supreme Court of India taking a lot of decisions on behalf of the executive. They always take the decisions and they argue that Article 142 of the Indian Constitution gives us the power to take any decision that brings in complete justice in the society. You have seen the Supreme Court overstepping their jurisdiction in the words of the Parliament. The Supreme Court trying to push the government to make certain policies. The Supreme Court taking certain executive decisions. Indian Parliament is unhappy with that because Indian Parliament believes in what Plato had said justice will be. Supreme Court overstepping their jurisdiction, be it striking down a law of the government, be it giving certain executive decisions A few years ago, I'll give you an example. 2019, in UP, the Lokayukt had completed the 5-year tenure, but the government was just not appointing a new Lokayukt. Maybe they were very friendly with the Lokayukt, they did not want him to be removed. Multiple years passed. The Supreme Court in 2019 gave an order saying that we will appoint the new Lokayukt of UP. Now, appointing a Lokayukt is a power of the governor, but the Supreme Court did that, saying that we have this power under Article 142. In the eyes of Plato, it would be injustice. In the eyes of Plato, any part or any arm of the government interfering or overstepping their jurisdiction and going into someone else's jurisdiction will amount to injustice. But the Supreme Court still does that. Now, in governance, if you look at real examples of how justice looks like, as I said, ministers are given different responsibilities, they have different portfolios. In bureaucracy, again, IAS officers that are part of the executive have to perform executive functions and not judicial functions. In an economy, also, teachers doing their part, lawyers doing their part, police doing their part, all to make the society a better place. That is how his theory of justice looks like today in practical life. Now, as we go ahead and read all other things that Plato had said, you will see not everything he says is valid today. It's not that every single thing that he had suggested has come true. These are just his ideas that he propagated. There are obviously a lot of issues with this. But if you look at the important components of his theory of justice, again, the first important component, functional specialization, extremely important. You are given a function in the society, just perform that function. That will be justice. Now, you can also criticize that. How? Think about India's history and the Varna system. The Varna system that was criticized by a lot of people. For example, Ambedkar spoke against it blatantly. Varna system that divided the society on the basis of the profession that you are supposed to perform. The Brahmins were supposed to perform a function. Shudras were supposed to perform a specific function. This is again another idea or another representation of functional specialization that Plato was talking about. For Plato, it will bring moral order in the society. Justice is not just about laws, it is about much, much, much bigger. For Plato, state is a living organization, so it has to keep changing, it has to keep evolving, and a living organization has to take care of its health. The difference between you and a table or a chair is the table or a chair doesn't get fever. They don't have to take care of their health, but you have to take care of your health. And this is where Plato says for a state to be healthy, justice is the health that they require. Justice is something that has to keep them alive, that has to keep them going. So, justice cannot be ignored. It is the single most important quality of a successful state. And it is not just about individual, justice is about the entire society. Now, at the same time, there have been many criticisms. There are very obvious criticisms of this theory. First, it believes in social immobility, means if you are in the producer class, you have no chance of, let's say, working very hard and then thinking, let me join the army, let me become a soldier as well. No. You are stuck to one single job that you have to do throughout your entire life. If you're a soldier, you are meant to be a soldier, nothing else. If you're a ruler, you are meant to be a ruler and nothing else. So there is no social mobility. There is no way that one person can go to the other end, can learn something new. No. As for Plato, it is on the basis of birth that your soul would have certain quality. You cannot change that. That leads us to the neglect of liberty, means the personal freedom, the personal choice that an individual should get. What kind of profession do you want? Has to be a very personal subject, right? You can take whatever, or you can have whatever kind of job or profession that you like. But in Plato's theory, that is not allowed. It is also a justification for totalitarianism. Now, later on, we'll read about someone called Karl Popper. Karl Popper, who has criticized a lot of people, specifically Plato, is someone who has he has criticized Marx, he has criticized. He thinks of Plato as someone who justifies totalitarianism. Totalitarianism means a dictator, someone who wants all the powers in their hands. We will read it later on. Plato's theory of philosopher king. where he wants philosophers to become king and give them all the powers. Popper thinks that Plato is an enemy of the open society. He doesn't want any external interference. He doesn't want any change in the society. He doesn't give people the freedom to explore their other side. There are static roles and there are vague definitions as well. The idea is it's easy to say that a society will have only three kind of occupations: ruling class, soldier class or auxiliaries, and the producer class. There are many other professions that can actually be at a mix of two, a mix of three. So there is no scope left by Plato because some of the definition that he has given are pretty vague here. These are some of the issues in what Plato has given his theory for. At the same time, there are a lot of contemporary relevance, or there's a lot of contemporary relevance of his theory. It is important to quote these things in the exam. I gave you this example of the Supreme Court taking certain decisions that the executive does not like. They think that it is an overreach. It is also about separation of power. The modern idea of legislative, executive, and judiciary doing their job separately is exactly what Plato was talking about. When he said there are three types of profession, the same thing can be applied to three organs of the government: legislative, executive, judiciary, doing their job separately. That's what modern democracies want to achieve. Similarly, in public administration, the government wants to find the right person for the right job. For example, in civil services, the government wants to make sure that you are well suited for the department where you are in. All of that has or can be connected to what Plato had said in his theory of justice. Now, this is everything that you needed to know to answer all these questions. Let me give you some examples of the questions that have been asked on this topic. So, 2020, there was a question about Plato's theory. The question was discuss Plato's concept of justice, examine its relevance in modern states. I gave you a lot of examples to quote here. 2014, Plato's justice is another name for specialization. Comment again the same thing. Plato's ideal state is totalitarian. Again, the same thing. You can write more about it when we study about philosopher king. 2012 critically examined Plato's communism, something that we'll read later on. Plato's theory of justice, an attempt to base the state not on force but on harmonious development of human faculties. And then again, similar questions have been asked. So it's a very recurring topic that you should be able to answer with this. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something new today. Do hit the subscribe and the like button. I'm also planning to start a new PSIR live patch on my app. If you have not downloaded my app, the name is Harshmeet Study Circle. I give the link in the description of the video. You can download that as well. I'll see you in the next one very soon. Bye bye. Take care of yourself. Jai Hind.